This episode of Trifles is made possible by listeners like you who support us on Patreon and Substack. To learn more, go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the cyclist was solitary, the bachelor was noble, and the resident was patient, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? On which 3 continents did Watson have experience of women? When did 221B Baker Street first get telephone service? And why does Holmes prefer telegrams over writing?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 421, Turkish Baths. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we look into the minutiae in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, is it bath time today? Is today one of your bath days?
Well, wait a minute. Let me look at the calendar. It's a Tuesday in January. Yeah, one Tuesday in January, at least once a year, I always have a bath. And in fact, I'm speaking to you from the bath right now.
Perfect.
That's why it echoes.
How many rubber duckies do you have?
6. 6, one for each
Perfect.
Napoleon, and then, of course, Dave.
Dave. Poor Dave. Everyone forgets about him.
Not me.
Thank goodness. I wonder if we could find any mention of rubber duckies in the canon. I'm thinking
Ducks, certainly, and rubbers, certainly. Wouldn't it be funny to have rubber 6 Napoleons that would just sort of sink to the bottom of the tub?
Well, one of them would.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Or soap in the shape of a bust of Napoleon.
There you go.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, and eventually when you work your way down to the nub of the soap, if you are so lucky, you would have a black pearl inside.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's something to look forward to.
It is something to look forward to. We also are looking forward to this episode where we're going to talk about Turkish baths, exactly what they are, what they were, and why Holmes and Watson seem to be attracted to them, and what time frame they use them. Fascinating discussion ahead about Turkish baths. Meantime, if you would like to help support the show, you can do that on Patreon or Substack. Just go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com. And there you can sign up to follow the show, subscribe. We'll let you know when new episodes come out. And on those platforms, you have access to additional bonus material, stuff that isn't available to the general public. And over on Patreon, you can choose the level that you support us. And on Substack, I think it's $5 a month, or whatever you want to contribute. We accept all kinds. But we'll have lovely stuff for you, our supporters, as well as, at the end of every month, a drawing for a free back issue of the Baker Street Journal. It's all available there on Patreon and Substack. Check out the links in the show notes. Well, we would like to talk to you about the relaxing, rejuvenating effects of the Turkish bath. Bert, do you remember the first time you read the Sherlock Holmes stories and came across a mention of a Turkish bath?
Yes, I do. And I always assumed, somewhere along the line, I acquired information about the Turkish bath that I now see, now that we've done some reading for this episode, was erroneous.
How so?
But I do recall that, and the first time I think we find it is it's not in the casebook, but it's in His Last Bow, and it's the disappearance of Lady Frances Carfax. And what I loved about that had nothing to do with the Turkish bath. It has to do with the comedy that opens the scene in Baker Street. So the first line of The Disappearance of Lady Frances Carfax is, "But why Turkish?" asked Mr. Sherlock Holmes, gazing fixedly at my boots.
Ha!
"English," I answered in some surprise. "I got them at Latimer's in Oxford Street." Holmes smiled with an expression of weary patience. "The bath. The bath. Why the relaxing and expensive Turkish rather than the invigorating homemade article?"
And Watson says, because for the last few days I've been feeling rheumatic and old. A Turkish bath is what we call an alternative in medicine, a fresh starting point, a cleanser of the system. And Holmes says, well, by the way, I have no doubt the connection between, by the way, Holmes, I added, I have no doubt the connection between my boots and a Turkish bath is perfectly self-evident one to a logical mind, and yet I should be obliged to you if you would indicate it. So how the deuce did you know I was at a Turkish bath? By looking at my boots.
Well, and then you get this remarkable cascade of information from Sherlock Holmes that if you stop and think about any of it, you might actually question some. But basically he says, well, look, I look at you and I see you've got some splashes on your left sleeve and the shoulder of your coat. So you wouldn't be sitting in the center of a hansom. You would have been on the side. You sat at the side. And so it's equally clear you had a companion. And and then I look at your boots and I see you're in the habit of doing up your boots in a certain way. But no, today it's an elaborate double bow. So who has tied them? Well, clearly either a bootmaker or the boy at the bath. So there you are.
And he says it's not the bootmaker because these are fairly new boots. So it's the bath.
Yeah.
And after all that, the Turkish bath has served a purpose. So for Holmes, it was the Turkish bath helped him by virtue of allowing him to exercise his logical faculties. And then we run into the Turkish bath also in the opening of another story, and that takes place in The Illustrious Client, which was part of the case book. Lady Frances Carfax came out in 1911, Illustrious Client in 1924. And Watson says, both Holmes and I had a weakness for the Turkish bath. It was over a smoke in the pleasant lassitude of the drying room that I found him less reticent and more human than anywhere else. On the upper floor of the Northumberland Avenue establishment, there's an isolated corner where two couches lie side by side, and it was on these that we lay upon September 3rd, 1902, the day when my narrative begins. I asked him if anything was stirring, and his answer, he simply shot his long, thin, nervous arm out of the sheets which enveloped him and had drawn an envelope from the inside pocket of the coat which hung beside him. So there we go.
Yeah.
In the drying room.
Yes. Now, I had always assumed or learned somewhere along the line inaccurately that the Turkish bath was made up of a series of rooms involving a sauna-like environment, a steam-like environment, and then a cooling rinse kind of environment. And that's not completely inaccurate, but largely inaccurate. The Turkish bath, as it turns out, largely involves passing through three hot rooms, one hotter than the next, two hot rooms, or two or three, that are hot and dry, and are made hot and dry by a furnace. So it's an enormous amount of energy to heat the air and move it around. And you can break your journey up across these rooms, two or three of these rooms, from hot, hotter, and hottest, by stepping into a cool or cold shower in the interval. And then you wind up at the end getting a massage. and a sort of a full body exfoliation. And then you are deposited in the drying room for at least an hour to relax and think happy thoughts.
So it's kind of like a schwitz.
Well, yeah. I mean, the point, I guess, was particularly in terms of cleanliness. And that's interesting because as you read it, you find out one of the things that contributed to the end of the Turkish bath was the increasing availability of hot water at home. Mm-hmm. And the ability, as Holmes says in Lady Frances Carfax, the homemade variety. You could take a nice hot bath at home and not have to go out to a club and spend that extra money, or a bath and spend that extra money.
No. Well, just in terms of the origins of the Turkish bath, this is something that would have been similar to the Roman baths or the Roman thermae. Muslim bathhouses or hammams were historically found across the Middle East and in North Africa, and then obviously owing to Muslim habitation in Spain, Portugal, India, Central Asia, etc. And it was both a religious tradition as well as a civic one. So you have your ritual ablutions, and obviously general hygiene, but it was also a social structure. It was a chance to relax and just chat, meeting place. And these were separated by gender, so it was men meeting with men, women meeting with other women. And I'm interested, too, in how these evolved in Victorian times. We have a whole article here we found on the Victorian Turkish bath, which is slightly different than just a traditional Turkish bath.
Well, and interestingly enough, they weren't Turkish. I mean, what it says in some of the material that we've looked at is that Western travelers encountered these, as you say, quite accurately, this style of bath that goes back to the Romans when they were first in Turkey. So Western travelers make a stop in Turkey, and it sort of becomes associated in their mind with the Turkish bath. But I think the actual practice in Turkey also included steam. And as you can tell, the Victorian Turkish baths were just these dry, hot rooms, punctuated by a cold shower and ending with a exfoliation and massage, and didn't have steam in them at all.
Now, when you went into the Turkish bath, I think there was either some code or password that was whispered. It sounded romantic and perky. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm struggling for the rest of the lyric.
Bakalafaka.
Oh, that's right.
Bakalafaka. They whisper it all over Turkey.
Right. Soupy sales. That was on the other side of the 45 record. The other side of that was the mouse, of course, which had nothing to do with the Turkish bath. But
well, we'll have a link to the full version of that song in the notes.
Oh, yeah. You don't want to miss that, folks.
Yeah, Do the Mouse and other teen hits.
Yeah.
But yeah, Victorian Turkish bath. It was simply sweating freely in hot, dry air, and then you're washed and massaged, and then cold wash or a shower. And hot air baths of the same type that were built after Queen Victoria's reign are known as Victorian-style Turkish baths. They became popular really toward the end of her reign, the last third of her reign, and then remained popular into the Edwardian years, first as a therapy, then simply as a cleansing process. And then ultimately, after you, as you say, as indoor plumbing and hot and cold running water became a regular thing, there was simply a place to go to relax, unwind, enjoy yourself. And it's interesting because that's perhaps what was happening with Watson here in, well, certainly in Lady Frances Carfax, but probably also during The Illustrious Client. He convinced Holmes to go with him in that second adventure. And if we look at the chronologists, well, Watson tells us very clearly The Illustrious Client, when they were there together, took place during September of 1902. And Lady Frances Carfax is usually dated a little before that, if I'm not mistaken. So if Watson is going for more of the relaxing type, this is still may be within Victoria's reign. And we could infer things about what that means about the state of plumbing at the Watson residence, whether he was going for his ritual cleansing or whether he was going to simply unwind and for medical purposes, as he mentioned.
Well, it's fascinating that this elaborate structure, these hot rooms and showers and so forth for massages, were actually on ocean liners. So on the Berengaria and on the Titanic and on others, there were Turkish baths. And according to some of these notes, the people who would enjoy them included Edward VIII, the Prince of Wales, who went on to be the Duke of Windsor, Johnny Weissmuller, who played Tarzan on screen, the comedian Phil Silvers, the actor George Arliss, Noel Coward, and H.G. Wells. There was no Turkish bath for women passengers. That'll teach them. But apparently there's, was a book written by a fellow who was an assistant on the Berengaria about the Turkish baths on the White Star and on the Cunard liners. And, this is an environment in which you're showing people the changing cubicles where they can change their clothes and take them to the first hot room and give them a drink of water and a towel and all of this stuff. Amazing.
That's fantastic. Well, it's really an extensive entry on Wikipedia here. We'll have an entry, and we'll have a link to this in the show notes. There are everything from flowcharts of the process to architectural designs for the layout, to a look at what some of the cooling rooms and the sudatoria might look like during that time.
It's interesting, too, about the cost of all of this. On the Queen Mary, a Turkish bath with an alcohol rub cost 10 shillings. A bath and rub on each of the 3 full days of the voyage cost only £1, 5 shillings, no pence. And then there was now this is in the 1960s, a memo from Cunard's head office, 1963, noted that on the Queen Mary, the cost of the Turkish bath's staff, 2 males, 1 female, and a boy, exceeded the revenue by £2,298, 5 shillings. And this was even more than the £2,000 that they lost on the slightly newer Queen Elizabeth. So this was a money-losing proposition at sea. Big surprise, but yes.
Goodness. Well, it's probably helpful to share where this first got its start in the United Kingdom. Victorian-style Turkish baths, as they were named, because they weren't specifically Turkish baths. These came into use in 1859, March 17th, 1859. Richard Barter opened the first Turkish bath in the country to be built for use by the general public in Cork, Ireland. And there were separate baths for men and women. They cost 1 shilling. Children under 10 paid half price, and You could bring your servants in for free. How do you like that? Because they were the ones who would undoubtedly have to carry your clothes around after you, or
yes,
maybe perhaps do the massage. I don't know.
They couldn't participate. They just sat there and perspired.
And they had to remain fully clothed.
Yeah.
The three main rooms were the sudatorium, the hottest, the tepidarium, and the frigidarium. That's where they kept the refrigerators. Frigidarium.
Yeah.
And back in England, who is this? It's Urquhart, who was following Barter's progress while he was involved in campaigning on behalf of Turkey. David Urquhart, behalf of Turkey prior to the Crimean War. He gathered around himself, particularly in the north of England, groups of mainly working-class political followers calling themselves foreign affairs committees, and who were calling meetings and writing in newspapers. So this, in turn, led to the Free Press, the Sheffield Free Press, and then the Free Press in London. And this is where the progress of the Turkish bath was published under Urquhart's direction at the Free Press.
Well, interestingly enough, folks, if you are still captivated here and say, boy, if only I could visit a Turkish bath, worry no more, because in London, apparently, there are still at least 3 Turkish baths operating. First of all, in England, as of May 2024, there were just 11 Victorian-style Turkish baths remaining open in Britain. Just 11? Seems to me a lot. There's the Royal Baths in Harrogate. There's the Ironmonger Row Baths in London that were being closed for refurbishment. There's the York Hall Leisure Centre in London, the Porchester Centre in London. At the Royal Automobile Club in London, there's a Turkish bath, and I've seen that one. I haven't been in it, but I've admired it from a dressed distance. Newcastle City, Mounts Baths in Northampton, Swindon Victorian Turkish Baths, Portobello Swim Centre, Arlington Baths Club, and the Western Baths Club, both in Glasgow. So in Edinburgh, Glasgow, and London, you can do that. And there you go.
Or you could just join a gym and take a sauna and hop in the pool.
Now, do you know that Victorian Turkish baths also appealed to villains in the canon?
What?
There's evidence for that, too.
Is there?
Yeah. Well, if you look at the Copper Beeches, you'll find the scene where Jeffro Rucastle is asking Violet Hunter what her salary was in her last position. And she tells him, and he says, rank sweating. But that's just a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
I thought at first it was something clever, but now I see there's nothing in it after all.